The first thing I remember is the sound of people clapping. It didn't make sense at first. Funerals aren't loud like that, not usually, but it kept building, steady and polite, like something had just been confirmed. I was sitting a few rows back, hands folded, trying to stay still, when I realized who they were clapping for. My name is Laura Bennett. I am 29 years old. My mother was standing at the front, holding the microphone with both hands, speaking clearly like she had practiced it. My father stood beside her, nodding at the right moments. Behind them, there was a photo of my grandmother from a few years ago, before everything changed. Your sister was her real strength, my mother said. She carried everything through to the end. There was a pause, and then the applause started. I didn't move. I could still feel the faint dryness on my hands from the sanitizer I had used before coming in. I watched my sister lower her head slightly, like she was trying not to cry. And I recognized the timing of it. For 7 months, I had paid for the treatment. Every visit, every adjustment, every late call that turned into another appointment. $186,000. I thought about standing up. I actually shifted forward in my seat for a second. But I stopped. I had already learned that speaking without proof doesn't do much when everyone else has already decided what they believe. The receipts were in my bag. I had brought them without really thinking about why. Printed, organized, dated. It had become a habit somewhere along the way. My father glanced toward the aisle, then back at my mother, and I noticed the way he tightened his jaw, just slightly. It wasn't enough for anyone else to see unless they were looking for it. Then someone moved near the back. My uncle stepped into the aisle with his phone in his hand. He didn't rush. He just walked forward until people started to notice. My mother turned, her voice cutting off mid-sentence. She asked me to play this, he said. My father took a step toward him, quiet but deliberate, like he meant to stop it before it started. But my uncle kept moving. He reached the front, connected the phone, and pressed the screen. The room went quiet. The screen at the front hadn't lit up yet, but I already knew what would happen next, because I had been preparing for it long before anyone else realized there was something to prepare for. I didn't start keeping records because I expected a confrontation. At the beginning, it was just a way to stay organized. Writing things down made it manageable. Saving receipts made it easier to track what had already been paid and what hadn't. Over time, it turned into something else. I kept copies of every payment and every appointment, not because I expected a fight, but because I knew I wouldn't remember it clearly later. I tried to bring it up once, before things got this far. My sister had just posted another video, one that made it look like she was there every day. I showed my parents the timeline on my phone, scrolling through appointments and payments lined up back to back. "This isn't accurate," I said. "You know that, right?" My mother didn't even look at the screen for long. "Don't make this harder than it already is," my father added, quieter but just as firm. "She's trying to help people understand what's happening." I remember standing there with the phone still in my hand, realizing they weren't disagreeing with me. They just didn't want to deal with it. After that, I stopped explaining. I just started to see the pattern more clearly. What people accepted wasn't based on what was true. It was based on what they could see, what didn't require them to question anything uncomfortable. Truth doesn't win when no one wants to hear it. So I kept everything, not to argue, not to prove a point in the moment, but because I had a feeling that one day it might be the only thing that didn't shift depending on who was telling the story. It started on a quiet afternoon that didn't feel different from any other. I found her on the kitchen floor. She was awake, but she couldn't get up, and her voice sounded thinner than I had ever heard it. I called for help before I fully understood what was happening, then stayed with her until the ambulance arrived. The ride to the hospital felt longer than it was, mostly because no one said anything that mattered. At the hospital, everything moved quickly after that. Tests, scans, a doctor who spoke in clear, careful sentences. He didn't soften anything, which I appreciated later. "She'll need aggressive treatment if you want to extend time," he said. "Without it, we're looking at comfort care." He explained the process, the frequency of visits, the uncertainty, and the cost. Insurance would cover some of it, but not everything, and not consistently. There would be gaps. We sat in a small consultation room afterward. My mother kept her hands folded, staring at the table. My sister leaned back, already calculating something I couldn't see yet. "We need to be realistic," my sister said. "This isn't something we can just take on." No one answered her right away. I remember looking at my grandmother through the glass, noticing how still she was, and realizing that waiting wasn't actually neutral. It was a decision. "I'll do it," I said. My father turned slightly. "Laura, think about what that means." "I have," I said. "I'm not waiting." There wasn't a discussion after that. Not a real one. The doctor came back in, and I told him we were moving forward with treatment. The rest of them didn't stop me, which felt like agreement at the time. It wasn't. Once the treatment started, everything became structured around it, not in a clean or predictable way, but in a way that left very little room for anything else. The first bills came within days. The treatment itself was only part of it. There were additional medications that insurance didn't fully cover, follow-up tests that had to be scheduled quickly, and adjustments that added costs each time something changed. Transportation became a constant expense, especially when appointments had to be moved to a specialized clinic across the city. I went through my savings, then credit, then loans, moving faster than I had time to think about the consequences. At one point, my father asked, "How are you keeping up with all of this? I'm not thinking about it long term." I said, "I'm just making sure the next payment goes through." He didn't argue with me. He didn't offer to take over either. I adjusted my work schedule as much as I could, shifting hours and reducing commitments until I was barely holding on to what I had left. There were a few nights I considered stopping, not because I wanted to, but because I didn't know how long I could keep it up. At night, I stayed with her when she needed help getting up or when she became disoriented and didn't recognize where she was. The hospital rooms were quiet most of the time. I learned to rest in short intervals without expecting real sleep. That was when I started tracking everything more carefully. Not just the amounts, but the timing, the purpose, and the pattern. It gave me a sense of control I didn't have anywhere else. It was repetitive and consistent, which made it easy to overlook if you weren't there. I didn't think about recognition while I was doing it. I was focused on keeping things moving forward, one step at a time, even when it started to wear me down in ways I didn't immediately notice. My sister started coming around more often after the first few weeks, but not in a way that changed anything about the actual work. Her visits were short, usually timed between my grandmother's better hours, and she always brought her phone with her. At first, I didn't think much of it. I assumed it was her way of coping. Then I started noticing patterns. She would arrive, sit close, hold my grandmother's hand, and speak softly for a few minutes. Then she would adjust her phone, angle it carefully, and record. The clips were brief but precise. They showed exactly what someone would expect to see if they were looking for a story about care and devotion. After she left, I stayed. The routine continued, just without the camera. A few days later, I saw one of the posts. Someone had sent it to me without commentary. The caption described long days, constant presence, emotional strain. The video showed her sitting beside the bed, speaking gently, framed in a way that suggested continuity. I didn't respond right away. The same structure repeated. Short visits, carefully captured, then presented as something ongoing. The reactions came quickly. People commented, shared, expressed support. One evening, I mentioned it while she was still in the room. "You know this doesn't reflect what's actually happening." I said. She didn't look up from her phone. "It reflects enough. That's not the same thing." She finally met my eyes, calm and steady. People don't need every detail. They need something they can follow. I understood then that we weren't talking about the same thing anymore. A few days later, I overheard part of a conversation she was having in the hallway. She mentioned an agent and something about interest from a publisher. It wasn't framed as a possibility. It sounded like something already moving forward. She mentioned an advance, something in the range of $80,000, and how quickly they wanted a draft. That was the point where it stopped feeling like a misunderstanding. She wasn't helping. She was curating. And once something is shaped that carefully, it becomes harder to separate from the truth it replaced. I didn't plan the confrontation. It happened because I reached a point where staying quiet started to feel like I was agreeing with something I knew wasn't true. We were in the living room, not far from where my grandmother was resting. My sister had just finished showing my parents a new post, something that had already started getting attention. I waited until she set her phone down before I spoke. "I need you to stop presenting this like you're here all the time," I said. "It's not accurate. You told them you were taking her to appointments," I said. "That's not what I said," she replied. "It's what you implied." "That's how people understood it," she said, and I didn't correct them. She didn't react immediately. Then she leaned back slightly, studying me in a way that felt measured rather than defensive. I took out my phone and opened the records I had been keeping. Dates, payments, appointment logs. I didn't rush through it. I showed them in order. "I've been covering the treatment," I said. "Every visit. Every expense." She glanced at the screen, then back at me. "That's your version." "It's not a version. It's documented." She picked up her phone again and scrolled for a moment before turning it toward them. Videos, photos, timestamps. Moments that looked complete when placed side by side. "This is what people see," she said. "This is what actually connects." My mother looked at my screen briefly, then shifted her attention back to my sisters. "You're making this harder than it needs to be," she said. My father added, "She's helping people understand what's happening. That matters too." "No one is lying," he said. "You're just focusing on different things." I stood there longer than I should have. No one said I was wrong. They just didn't treat it as important. That was the moment I understood the gap. It wasn't about facts anymore. It was about what felt real to the people watching, and her version was easier to accept because it was visible, consistent, and already believed. That was when I understood what actually carried weight in that room. After that, I stopped trying to correct it in real time. I did think about sending everything to the rest of the family, laying it out clearly, but I kept putting it off. At the time, it felt more important to keep things stable for my grandmother than to start a conflict I wasn't sure I could finish. My uncle didn't come every day, but when he did, he stayed long enough to notice things that weren't obvious to anyone just passing through. He had known my grandmother longer than anyone else in the room most days, and he treated the situation without commentary. One evening, he sat down beside me while I was going through a stack of invoices, organizing them by date and provider. He didn't interrupt right away. He just watched for a minute, then nodded slightly. "You've been keeping track of everything," he said. "I have to," I answered. "It's the only way I can keep it straight." He glanced toward the hallway where my sister had been earlier, then back at the papers in front of me. "I've been here enough to see the difference," he said. "You're here when nothing's happening. She's here when something can be shown." I didn't respond to that immediately. It wasn't something I needed confirmed, but hearing it from someone else changed the weight of it. He leaned back in his chair, his voice steady. "Keep everything. Don't rely on memory for this. I wasn't planning to." I said, "Good," he replied, "because if this keeps going the way it is, you may need more than just knowing the truth." That was the first time anyone suggested that what was happening might extend beyond the family, into something that required structure and protection. I gathered the papers into a folder, aligning the edges without thinking about it. It felt like a small action, but it gave me a clearer sense of direction than I had a few minutes before. There was a stretch of days when my grandmother was more present than she had been in weeks, and it happened quietly enough that I almost didn't trust it at first. She asked for water on her own, then corrected me when I adjusted her pillows the wrong way. Her voice was thin, but steady. It wasn't a full recovery of anything, just a window where things aligned long enough for her to see clearly. My uncle noticed it too. He spoke to me in the hallway later that afternoon. "This is the time," he said. "If anything needs to be formalized, it should be now." The next day, he arranged for a lawyer to come to the house. It wasn't a long meeting, but it was careful. The lawyer introduced himself, explained his role, and asked my grandmother a series of questions to confirm she understood what she was doing. My uncle stayed in the room, not speaking unless he was asked directly. I sat near the doorway, close enough to hear, far enough not to interrupt. "I want to update my will," my grandmother said, "and I want it done properly." The lawyer nodded and went through the details step by step. He didn't rush anything. The lawyer asked her to repeat key details, including dates and decisions, making sure they were consistent before anything was finalized. After the documents were prepared and signed, my grandmother asked for my uncle's phone. "I want to record something," she said. He handed it to her without hesitation. She spoke slowly, without raising her voice, and stayed focused the entire time. She described what the last months had been like, naming the frequency of care, the decisions that had been made, and who had been responsible for them. She mentioned the financial strain in simple terms, without emphasis. When she finished, she handed the phone back to my uncle. "If anything is said later that isn't true," she said, "you'll know what to do with this." He gave a small nod. "I understand." There wasn't any discussion after that. The room settled back into its usual rhythm, but something had shifted in a way that felt complete. From that point on, I didn't feel the same urgency to explain anything to anyone else. The screen flickered once before the image settled, and for a second no one seemed sure whether to keep watching or step in and stop it. My mother moved first. "This isn't necessary," she said, her voice tighter than it had been a moment earlier. "We can handle this privately." My uncle didn't look at her. "She asked for it to be played," he said, and that was enough to keep him where he was. My sister stepped forward, just enough to be seen without fully blocking the screen. "This is inappropriate," she said. "This isn't the time for something like this." "We don't even know when this was recorded," she added, turning slightly toward the room. No one answered her. Someone near the front shifted, like they might agree with her, but no one spoke out loud. Then my grandmother appeared on the screen, sitting upright, her expression steady in a way I hadn't seen at the end. She didn't hesitate or look off to the side. She spoke directly, as if she had already considered everything that might follow. "I want to be clear about the last months of my life," she said. Her voice wasn't strong, but it didn't waver. She moved through it in a way that left very little room for interpretation. Dates were mentioned, frequency of visits, who handled the appointments, who stayed overnight, who made decisions when things changed. She said my name, not once, but several times, each one placed where it needed to be. She described the treatment schedule, the cost in practical terms, the way it had been managed, $186,000. She didn't pause on the number. She just included it as part of the sequence. No one moved while she spoke. At some point, the room shifted. It wasn't immediate, and it wasn't loud, but it was noticeable. The attention that had been directed forward began to pull back, then settle somewhere else. Conversations that might have started didn't. My sister tried to interrupt again, but her voice didn't carry the same way it had earlier. "It didn't stop anything." My grandmother finished without adding anything extra. No emphasis, no appeal, just the facts, arranged in order. Then silence. The screen went dark. For a moment, nothing followed. No applause, no acknowledgement, just a quiet that felt different from before. I stayed where I was, but I could feel it. The focus had changed, not sharply, not all at once, but enough to make the difference clear. I didn't reach for the receipts in my bag. I didn't need them anymore. After the funeral, things didn't unfold dramatically. They settled. The publisher withdrew from my sister's project within weeks, and the advance she had already received had to be returned under legal terms she couldn't avoid. A few people who had supported her publicly stopped responding altogether. My parents didn't try to take control again. They stepped back in a way that wasn't announced but was easy to recognize. We haven't rebuilt anything since then, and I don't think we're trying to. I used what I received through the will to close everything I had opened during those months. The debt was paid off, one account at a time, until there was nothing left carrying forward. I kept the house because it made sense. Later, I started helping a few people quietly, mostly with the practical side of things: how to track expenses, how to keep records, how to prepare for conversations no one expects to have. If there's anything I would say now, it's simple. Keep your records, even when you trust the people around you. Not because you're expecting a fight, but because clarity matters when things start to shift. I visit my grandmother's grave without bringing anything with me most of the time. I stand there for a few minutes, then leave. It feels complete in a way I didn't expect, like something finally settled into place without needing to be explained.